Hello and welcome to the review for Ray Bradbury's From the Dust Returns. Terrible reflection from the windows, but there you go. Beautiful cover. Stunning cover. Here's a new novel it proclaims on the cover, and indeed it was back in 2001 when it was published. So, this is a different Ray Bradbury. This is not the Ray Bradbury that you get from Fahrenheit 451, nor the Ray Bradbury of the Martian Chronicles. That edgy, almost urgent feeling that we got from the dystopian Fahrenheit isn't there, and the strange intensity from the Martian Chronicles in this book have changed into a lyrical, mythic type of story. It's very much a mood read. It's perfect for when you're calm or tired. I was exhausted when I read it. A reflective mood where you can drift along languidly with the lovely language. It reminded me in a few ways of, I guess, Neil Gaiman. It reminded me of a lot, but it's got that mythic quality very much mood writing. Okay, so the novel is based around a few stories that were published between the 40s and the 80s, and they've been working to this mesmerizing story. So somewhere in the American Midwest, I'm going to say Illinois, but I'm not up on American geography, there is a house. It's an extraordinary house in which live an extraordinary family who are about to be visited by the extended and even more extraordinary family. So this family is variously called the Elliot family and the Eternal family. When this book is referred to in other articles, it seems to talk about the Elliot family, but I don't remember them being called that in the actual novel. I think they were called the Eternal family there. So, family of far-reaching and various characters. Some of them are alive, some of them are not, some of them are invisible, some of them have fangs and claws, many of them can't be out in daylight. And the house itself is its very own mysterious character and a refuge. The beginning of the house isn't really well described. It's sort of touched upon in places, and the first inhabitants, Anuba arrives, and Anuba is a cat, and talks a little bit about the time and the place. Another original arrival is Mouse Far Travelling, which started out as a mummified mouse in the same way that Anuba started out as a mummified cat in ancient Egypt. The house, the spider, and the child. And the child in question is Timothy. He is kind of the nucleus through which we see this family and this story, and he is the ongoing part of the narrative that allows this to be a book more than a collection of stories, which it does occasionally feel more like a collection of stories than a book. Timothy is kind of the thread that runs throughout it. Timothy was left behind on the doorstep in a basket about 10 years before, and though the family were absolutely horrified by him because he clearly wasn't one of the family, they held up a mirror and he had a reflection. A reflection. But in the end, they took him in. And the nuclear family, as well as the cat, Anuba, the spider, and the mouse, seems to be father, and father must sleep in a box in the cellar during daylight hours. There's mother, who never sleeps at all. There's Ceci, who sleeps in the attic, and while she sleeps, she sends her mind out to travel in the minds of anything, crickets and possibly pebbles and leaves and other people, and she travels throughout. Later in the book, there comes the point where Ceci can actually travel other people's minds as well as her own, and that's kind of interesting, and it's a plot development thing. Anyway, the book starts with Grandmere in the attic. Timothy goes up to visit her. He's really excited. Halloween's about to come. The extended family are going to visit from all over the world. Grandmare's not alive, but maybe not entirely dead. She is the beautiful one, Neff, who was mother to Nefertiti, and she is a mummy. Still in mummified form, but she talks to Timothy a lot and tells him the story of the house and the story of the inhabitants. So in a way, I don't really want to talk too much about the story itself, because the actual reading is the fun. The details are mere details, and they're sort of like encountering nice things. So you go scuba diving and it's the diving that's the thing. You may encounter a whale or a turtle or a beautiful fish, but they're sort of things that happen within the scuba diving. That's a very strange simile to a science fiction story, isn't it? But yeah, so the actual events are sort of things that you encounter within the book rather than anything else. So it's not that long, it's quite beautiful. As well as the cover, you've got little illustrations throughout. And in the afterword, Bradbury talks about the genesis of the book. And his explanation explains why it feels like half a novel and half a short story collection. And at the back you've got a list of the 6 short stories, of which portions appear in this novel. Portions of this book have previously appeared as follows: The Traveller in Weird Tales, 1945. Homecoming, first published in Mademoiselle, 1946. Uncle Einar was first published in Dark Carnival by Arkham House, 1947. I have definitely read Uncle Einar before, so you've got this list. I had definitely read a couple of these stories before, and I remembered them quite well. I don't know when I read them. There were a couple that were wholly new to me, and the connective elements of the book, Timothy and the house, and the ending was completely new to me. I suspect it was written specifically to tie this book into its own thing. The afterword was also interesting. Bradbury gives a bit of a backstory. His own extended family of aunts and uncles who would visit the house apparently was the genesis of the story of all these weird aunts and uncles with tooth and fangs and invisibility coming from Europe and all over America and all over the world for Halloween. And he also talks about how in his early days he was selling stories, he was selling a lot to Weird Tales and he was earning from them and he felt good about that. Weird Tales was buying his work at, I think, a certain amount of cents per word. But there was a little bit of friction. The magazine wanted traditional ghost, graveyard, scary stories, and Bradbury eventually got sick of that. It wasn't really challenging his author abilities, and when he submitted Homecoming in 1946, it was immediately rejected by Weird Tales as not being ghosty enough. And that sounds like it was a really important part in Bradbury's development as an author, because he sent it to a different magazine called Mademoiselle. I don't know anything about this magazine, but they accepted it straight up, and it sounds like that was a part of what allowed him to expand into other types of writing. An interesting thing, I'm reading a short story collection at the moment, in which, written in, I think I'm going to say the 50s or the 60s, I could be wrong about that, in which they talk about the traditional science fiction authors that are like the nucleus of the American science fiction world. And they talk about Heinlein and Asimov, and Bradbury is the third one. And that's very different, because Ray Bradbury isn't mentioned in modern compilations as being one of the nucleus of science fiction. These days people are more likely to talk about Asimov, Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke. So I just thought that was an interesting thing. But apparently back into the day, he was thought as mainstream and important to the emerging science fiction magazine genre as Heinlein and Asimov. Now let's look at that absolutely beautiful cover. This cover was purpose drawn, as were the illustrations, by Charles Addams. And apparently Bradbury and Charles Addams were first knocking around the idea of an illustrated novel way back. I can't remember what date he gave, and I don't suppose it really much matters, because you're going to buy this book and you're going to read it, aren't you? And then you can find out for yourselves. Here's Mouse, far travelling, one of the first inhabitants of the house. So Charles Addams, I was impressed by the illustrations, and Spider, there's Spider. But what I didn't know about him was Charles Addams was actually the cartoonist who first developed the Addams Family. And the Addams Family first started out as 150 standalone single-panel comics, according to Wikipedia. Thank you, Wikipedia. And about half of those were originally published in The New Yorker between 1938 and their creator's death in 1988. So apparently for years, Charles Addams, beautiful illustrationist, Addams Family, thank you Charles Addams, and Ray Bradbury knocked about this notion for a book that would be illustrated, and this was published in 2001, so unfortunately it would sound, after Charles Addams' death. Great book, thoroughly enjoyed it, but mood reading. If you've just finished Fahrenheit 451 and you want another Ray Bradbury, go on to a different one, not this one. This is more suited to someone who loved Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Tale, in which also you've got a normal boy growing up amongst spooky type people, or someone who loved American gods. So the American gods theory is the old gods of the old world are no longer relevant in America, and so they're dying off, or they're trying to inhabit the interstitial spaces of modern society. And in many ways that's relevant to here, because here you've got the old ghosties of the old world, the ghosts, possibly vampires, the mummies, the scary things, and again you've got a modern credulous society and no space for them within it. So yeah, I'd say this is in terms of a reading experience more similar to those books. And even that isn't exactly true. The themes are more similar to those books, but the actual reading experience is mythic and floaty, and it doesn't have that hard-hitting, strong, driving theme. Maybe it is quite similar to the Martian Chronicles, now I come to think of it. I felt that way about the Martian Chronicles. I obviously need to reread them. I don't remember them well enough. Anyway, have a Merry Christmas. If you see this around about the time I post it, read good books, buy books for people as presents, because what better present can you give? And like, comment, subscribe, all that sort of YouTube algorithm stuff.